Hello, everyone. My name is Marie Gindi. I'm happy to talk to you today about not yet, characterizing the changes in medical cannabis use over time. In other words, what happened to individuals reporting using cannabis for medical reasons pre-legalization, after legalization, until this year. So, a quick start with the most recent report from the Canadian Cannabis Survey that collects data about cannabis use every year from Canadians, and their sample size is more than 10,000 people. So according to the most recent report, 13% of Canadians of age 16 or older are using cannabis for medical reasons. Most of them did not report to have medical authorization for their cannabis use, and about 31% reporting their cannabis use as being daily used. Also, the three main products that has been reported are the oils, the dry flower, and the edibles. Now let's have a little overview on locally what we are doing in the PASCAN study that you've been probably hearing about it for like yesterday and today during the conference. The PASCAN study includes more than 1,500 people from the greater Hamilton area, and it's collecting data about cannabis use from pre-legalization until now. The focus of the study is big, but the focus of today's talk is just around 19% of the whole study, the individuals who reported the use of cannabis for medical reasons at pre-legalization, and what happened to them over the years. So the total sample that we are talking about today is 281. And after quality control, we ended up having 281 participants. After quality control, it's 263. So let's have an overview what's happening over the years. So here at time 1, the first time to collect the data, it's September 2018. So just before legalization, and these were the individuals responding yes to the question, did you use any cannabis for medical reasons during the past 6 months? And then we come to T2 here, the second time point, which is April 2019, 6 months after legalization. And all the times until T12, April 2023, this year. So we started having this blue bars here represents individuals using cannabis for both medical and recreational reasons, and we call them the dual users. And the yellow bars here, the 19%, represents individuals using cannabis for only medical reasons. So this happened after legalization. The appearance of all the green bars, individuals using cannabis for recreational reasons only, and the brown bars, individuals stopping or who stopped using cannabis at all, completely. So all these changes all over the year for 4.5 years, let's have a snapshot of what exactly happened from pre to post-legalization. This is what happened. So here, the pre-legalization point, and this is the 81% reporting using cannabis for both medical and recreational reasons. We see here about half of them continue to be dual users, and the other half either use for recreational reasons or they stopped using cannabis at post-legalization. Let's see what happened to the yellow bars. The yellow bar are the individuals using cannabis for only medical reasons. And over the years, we see here that the yellow bar here shrinked a lot. It decreased to only 5% this year. And what happened that most of the people in this yellow bar using cannabis for medical reasons either stopped using cannabis completely, or they shifted their use, adding a recreational reason for their use, so they became dual users. In order to know more about our sample, this is some characteristics about the sample. So the mean age was around 33 years old. The sample was 60% females. Most of the sample reported Caucasian ethnicity. And regarding their cannabis use, the frequency of cannabis use was on average more than 3 days per week. Most of them did not have medical authorization for medical use. And also the most endorsed cannabis form was dried plant followed by edibles. Now we had a question. And the question was, is our sample a homogeneous group of people just using cannabis for medical reasons over time? Or is there some sort of underlying heterogeneity within the sample? Also, is there a statistical method that can help us to reveal all the heterogeneity within that group of people? Is there a way to know if there is any heterogeneity within our sample? And the answer was yes. We did a hidden Markov model, and this model basically does a sophisticated job in order to capture all the underlying latent states not directly observed from the data, and accounting for measurement errors, as well as the transition over time from a state of use to another. In other words, it allows for unobserved heterogeneity and transition over time. In our sample, the pre-legalization cannabis use categories, both the dual use and the medical-only use, were used to influence both the states and the transition probability over time. Now let's have a closer overlook to understand what's happening to individuals using cannabis for medical reasons. This is the result of the Markov model. I'm going to simplify it for you, so don't worry. According to the model, there are 4 categories of use within the sample: the no cannabis users, recreational use, medical-only use, and a dual use state. So 4 kinds of behavior underlying this sample of medical users. And these are the percentages of chance to transition from one kind of use to another over time. So in order to simplify this, here is the story. If someone in the medical use category, there is 65% to stay using, keep using cannabis for medical-only reasons over time. However, there is 21% to stop using cannabis completely, and there is another 14% to add recreational use to their use and become a recreational user. As you see, there is no transition to the green color. There is no transition from a medical-only user to recreational-only user. Let's continue to know the story of someone in the category of recreational-only use. Recreational-only users, we did not observe, according to the model, many transitions. So there is 92% to stay or to keep cannabis for recreational-only reasons, and there is only 8% to stop using cannabis. There is no observed movement or transition from recreational to the medical use. Moreover, if someone in the dual use category, there is 92% to continue using cannabis for both recreational and medical reasons. However, there is 4% chance to drop their medical use and use cannabis for recreational only reasons. There is 2% chance to stop the recreational use and be just medical users, and a tiny 2% chance to stop cannabis completely. Finally, if someone in the no-use group, there is 90% chance over time not to use any cannabis and to stay a no user, but there is 5% chance to use cannabis for recreational reasons, 4% chance to transition to a medical user, and only 1% chance to become a dual user. So this model concluded all the 4 behaviors and heterogeneity in changing from a state of use to another, and all the percentages that each state of use can transition over time and change their use for. So what we can conclude from all this data is, first, that legalization of the recreational use for cannabis in Canada had significant effect on the medical use also. The change in policy seems to change the behavior of people. We saw from the results that most of individuals reporting medical-only use of cannabis pre-legalization here shifted their use to either dual use or recreational-only use over time. We saw that the yellow bar that started was 19%, after 4.5 years shrink to only 5% of the sample. We saw also that mostly half of the dual users switched their use to either recreational-only use and dropped their medical use of cannabis completely, or completely dropped cannabis and stopped using. We saw that most of the individuals reporting medical use of cannabis, they do not have medical authorization from pre-legalization to post-legalization. Also, we saw that individuals reporting the pre-legalization medical cannabis use were shown to be a heterogeneous group with different states and some trends of transition over time. They exhibited highly dynamic changes and self-attribution over time. The hidden Markov model revealed four categories of cannabis use, and some trends were not observed. For example, we did not see recreational-only use to switch to a medical-only use, or we didn't see medical use only to switch to recreational-only use. Therefore, the continuous collection of data for medical cannabis use is so important to monitor the trends of change in states and transition over time in order to guide future policy decisions. At the end, I would like to acknowledge and thank all the wonderful people I'm lucky to work with: Dr. James McKillop, PI, Kyla Belisario, the super statistical analyst, and all the wonderful team in PathCan, Peter Boris, Michael DeGroote. Thank you for being so awesome and so supportive. And thank you so much for listening. I'm going to leave the little laser pointer just in case someone needed from any of the presenters, and I'm going to take it at the end of the day.
Excellent job.
Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about the effects of the expanding legal recreational cannabis market in Canada on alcohol sales, tobacco sales, and medical cannabis authorizations. And I first want to acknowledge Alicia Cooper, who's in the audience, who has been the analyst on this project and has taught me everything about this, and she's been amazing. So the background for this project, there's been a lot of obviously concern surrounding how legalization would affect cannabis use, but there's also been concern about the collateral impacts on alcohol, tobacco, and medical cannabis. And there's really three economic possibilities. There's substitutability, where increased access to cannabis would lead to the decrease in use of another substance. There's complementarity, where it would be increased access to cannabis would lead to increased use of another substance, and then independence where they're not related. And so far, evidence is relatively scarce, but mixed so far. And it often depends on the substance being examined and the population under study. So the objective for this study was to examine national retail sales of legal cannabis in Canada in relation to national retail sales of alcohol and tobacco, as well as national rates of medical cannabis authorizations since legalization in 2018. So the data for this project are all publicly available. So we got monthly national retail sales of legal cannabis, alcohol, and tobacco from October 2018 since the start of legalization. Also monthly national medical cannabis authorizations. Also monthly consumer price index, which is important. It's been highlighted that the price of cannabis has gone down, so it's important to adjust for that. And just like one of the strengths of these data is they're more objective than self-reported data, but they are ecological, so they may not be generalizable to certain subpopulations. So this has been shown in a few of the presentations so far, but this is just monthly cannabis sales over time. This is seasonally adjusted. And you can see just a steady increase from the start of legalization. It's about a 10-fold increase starting, I think it was around 40 million, and now it's over 400 million. And here's the previous slide in relation to alcohol sales and tobacco sales. And those are also seasonally adjusted. So you can see that alcohol sales were fairly flat, maybe a slight increase, and alcohol sales were tobacco sales maybe slightly decreased over time. And this is cannabis sales in relation to medical authorization since legalization. And you can see obviously the steep increase juxtapositioned against the decrease in medical authorizations. Oops. Okay, so for the methods, and I'm new to these, but we used vector autoregressive modeling, which captures the relationship between the time series over time. It regresses each variable at time t on lagged values of itself, as well as the other variable. And we use Granger causality testing, and this determines whether one time series can be used to forecast the other time series. So the steps of the analysis were to, one, visualize the data. We've kind of done that. Remove seasonality and adjust for price changes over time. Check for stationarity, which is a key assumption for this method. Make the data stationary, so remove those things. Fit the model, and then conduct this test. And we also did a sensitivity analysis. So just in terms of what stationarity is, so a time series is stationary if the mean and variance do not depend on time. So on the left, you can see what that actually looks like. In the middle is non-constant mean, so you can see that upward trend over time. And then on the right is non-constant variance. So you can see at the start, there's less variance than at the end. So you would want, on the two on the right, you would want to correct for those. So the example of cannabis sales and alcohol or tobacco sales. So this is just raw, unadjusted. So what you do is you decompose it, you get the seasonal components, you get the trend components, and what you're left over with is this white noise, and that's what you're using to conduct these tests. And this is what the time series look like after that decomposition and differencing, kind of removing the trend and all of that. So this is alcohol sales, cannabis sales, and tobacco sales. And then this is cannabis sales versus medical cannabis authorizations. So the results of the tests, there was no evidence of Granger causality between cannabis and alcohol sales or between cannabis and tobacco sales. There was some evidence of cannabis sales Granger causing, that's the term that you would use, medical cannabis authorizations such that higher cannabis sales were associated with fewer authorizations. And you kind of saw that in the graphs. And we did test a dummy variable just because COVID had such a profound impact on these variables, but it didn't really change any of the results. So the interpretation is legal cannabis sales increased steadily, but were independent of alcohol and tobacco sales. Liberalization of cannabis access did not appear to result in increases in these other substances. And then on the flip side, for the medical authorizations, increasing cannabis sales appeared to displace part of the medical cannabis markets, forecasting decreases in medical cannabis authorizations over time. It's unclear whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in relation to the medical cannabis market. And as many others have said, there's obviously a need for further studies with longer follow-up periods to see if these trends continue over time. And that's the end. I'll turn it over to Amanda. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about epi patterns, kind of population surveillance data, and today right now I'm going to be talking to you about label accuracy. So label accuracy of legal oral cannabis oil products in the Ontario market. To give you a little bit of background, you've kind of already heard pieces of this over the last kind of day and a half, but Canada has decently strict labeling restrictions around what is allowed on a cannabis label and what it has to look like. Some of those restrictions are like it can't appeal to youth or children, although obviously we've heard different provinces interpret that a little bit differently. It has to have kind of the health warning on it. And one of those restrictions that I'm going to focus on today is the variability allowance. So how much a label amount can actually be different from the actual amount of THC and CBD in a product. Evidence from US jurisdictions on this topic doesn't show a very positive outlook on this issue. There's been a lot of discrepancy between label and actual amounts in legal US markets. But no independent study has actually looked at this for the Canadian legal market. And I say that with like a little asterisk because there was a report in the, report or article, whatever you want to call it, in the Globe and Mail a couple weeks ago that talked about this. They talked about kind of over-labeling for THC, but that evidence kind of came from private analytic labs or private kind of cannabis laboratories. So when I say kind of no one's really looked at this, I'm kind of saying that from an academic published study perspective. No one has kind of compared these values in the Canadian market. So that's what we did. We ordered 30 cannabis oil products from the Ontario Cannabis Store. And just to give you an idea of the product landscape, if you're unfamiliar in Ontario, you can kind of purchase products for recreational use in two different ways. You can order them online through the Ontario Cannabis Store, which I'll probably call OCS from now on, or you can go into a storefront. But storefronts get their supply from the same place that OCS has their supply. So we order all the products online, but that doesn't mean that it's like they're dissimilar to the products that you would have access to in a store. So it's not representative because obviously we didn't test every product, but it does reflect the product landscape in Ontario. The variability allowance for cannabis oil products is 15% according to the guidelines. It's actually a little bit non-specific. 15% is the guidelines for cannabis extracts, and since oil is technically an extract, That's what we considered the most relevant variability limit for cannabis oils. What we did was we compared the THC and CBD content via HPLC. That was done at the Center for Microbial Chemical Biology at McMaster here. And an important note is this is a Health Canada licensed laboratory, which you need to do this sort of research. And the rest is kind of simple methodologically. We just compared the actual amounts to the label amounts and saw how different or similar they were. And while I would love to show you that right away, because I'm sure everyone's really excited to see that, I actually have to talk to you about some somewhat surprising differences first. So you've seen a lot of screenshots over the past day and a half from like the OCS website, and it shows you when you're buying something, the amount of THC and CBD in a product. And I think it's a generally reasonable expectation that when you receive that product, those amounts would be the same. But for a lot of the, or for a handful of the 30 products that we ordered, they actually weren't. So this graph here kind of shows the difference in THC amounts in the total bottle of cannabis oil between like time of ordering on the OCS website and what was actually on the label. So you can see a lot of them are 0, but a handful of are not. The top product there, product ID number 2 or sample ID 2, there was actually 120 more milligrams of THC in the bottle, like on the actual label, compared to when it was ordered on the website. And kind of similar-ish issues for CBD. Again, a handful of them are the same, but or most of them are the same, I should say, but a handful of them are different. So if I had to sum this up for you, kind of for THC, there was a 33% of our products were mismatched between website and label amount, and for CBD, that was 37%. So we've been talking a lot about how confusing labeling and everything is to consumers. I'm adding another layer of that right now for you. That yeah, here's another layer of confusion. When something is ordered, it's not quite the same as what you get, or can be, I should say. Another area of kind of confusion, I have to explain to you a little bit how Ontario cannabis labeling works. So Dave Hammond alluded to this yesterday during his talk, but there's THC and total THC, and there's CBD and there's total CBD on a cannabis product. Those are on the labels. What are the differences between those? So these are screenshots, by the way, from the OCS website. They actually have a pretty good guide for how to read cannabis labels. It's quite long. I would maybe posit that it wouldn't have to be so long if the labels were a bit more simple, but this is what we have right now. So I'm just gonna highlight for you here, THC, total THC, CBD, total CBD. Those numbers are different, you see, because this is a picture of a dried flower product. So THC is just the amount of THC in a product before decarboxylation, so before it's heated. Because dried flower is heated by the consumer, they also are going to give you total THC amount, which is, you know, after it's heated, how much THC is in it. So really total THC is more relevant, and same with total CBD. So those are different, and OCS directly tells you the standard contents are going to be different. For oils, because these are already pre-processed, consumers they're oral ingestible oils, so consumers aren't heating them before they're consuming them, those numbers should be the same. And that's directly stated there, levels should be the same. So what's confusing is that for 5 of the products that we ordered, those numbers were not the same. This is just a table of those 5 products here. You can see most of them are off by like 1 or 2 milligrams per gram. Again, that's still confusing even though it's a small amount because they should just be the same. But one product, product ID 12, actually there was quite a difference. They said 5 milligrams per gram of CBD and 26 milligrams per gram of total CBD. And just to give you a picture of the product label here, you can see CBD and total CBD. So confusingly, those were different. Now I'm going to show you the lab test amount, and the conclusion for this particular product is probably that was a typo because the lab test amount actually showed 4.4 milligrams of CBD, so I'm unclear where they got 26 from. So now the actual kind of primary research question at hand, I can show you the results for that. So what is the difference between what was on the label and what was actually in the product? And I'm going to start with THC. So this graph shows you the absolute differences as well as the percentage differences. So the distance between those two dots is the absolute difference in milligrams per gram. So label is blue and the lab test is red. And then I've also labeled anything over 15%, because as you recall, that's the allowable variability limit. And you can see that there is quite a few products that are lower in THC than actually it's said on the label. And if I have to sum this up for you, it's 40% of the products, of those 30 products that were different beyond the 15% limit for THC. All of them were over-labeled, so there was more THC on the label than was actually in the product, except for one, which was, I don't know if you can see the numbers, but it's number 5, but you can see that that's actually a very small absolute difference. It was technically 70% greater, but just by the way that percentages work, if you have a really kind of small amounts, the percentages are going to be larger, but if you have really like kind of higher amounts of THC, you actually have more leeway when it comes to the percentage difference, which kind of seems like the opposite to how the public health regulation should work. But that is also the reason that we have that line on the graph here, that 2.5 milligrams per gram. We just wanted to calculate a summary statistic that really got rid of the products that were really, really low amounts of THC, just so we can give you a little bit more of a relevant number. That 2.5 just comes from OCS's guideline on what a low dose of THC is. So if we look at those products, the kind of more relevant THC products, it was 44% of them were over-labeled beyond that 15% variability limit. So in terms of CBD, not quite as bad in terms of what the story is. 10% of the products were over-labeled beyond the variability limits or they were outside the variability limits for CBD. Remember I showed you that product earlier that was like 5 milligrams per gram and 26 milligrams per gram, that discrepancy, that's product 12 at the top there. So because we use total THC and total CBD for all these graphs, that one looks particularly bad. But again, this is probably because they had what I can only assume is a typo on their label. So not as many products were over-labeled for CBD. So if I'm to kind of sum up everything for you, we found that a large proportion of the products, or definitely a non-zero proportion of the products that we ordered were definitely outside of those variability limits. A lot more were over-labeled for THC compared to CBD, which does kind of raise concerns about where this over-labeling is coming from, because we've heard this yesterday and a little bit today, that product price tends to increase with THC content, but less so for CBD content. The Globe and Mail article that I mentioned earlier in the talk also kind of echoes these same concerns, that why are kind of producers over-labeling for THC. I want to make a quick note too. Marie talked about medical cannabis use, and at the very beginning she mentioned that cannabis oils were a popular product for people using for medical purposes. This could be particularly problematic for people using medically, because as you might imagine, trying to figure out what dose is right is hard enough, but then maybe once you figure out a dose, you don't actually get the number that it says on the label. So really, this kind of does suggest that we need better regulatory oversight of labeling, especially when it comes to the comparisons that we made between lab and actual amounts. There's evidence there, but also just the discrepancies with the website and the discrepancies within the label definitely raise some red flags. The silver lining to this, though, is we didn't really find any products that were under-labeled, and by that I mean there was no product that said there was a certain amount of THC on the label and there was actually way more. And that is a good finding. It's a positive finding for public health, because that means kind of we're not super worried that, you know, people are ingesting way more than they're actually intending to. At least they're kind of not being misled by the labels in that way. But that's not to say that that doesn't exist in other products. I'll remind you, this was 30 products, and they were all cannabis oil products. So this definitely suggests that we should probably keep looking at the products in the market, and especially looking at the other available types of products as well. And with that, I will end it here. Thank you for listening, and I think we're happy to take any questions regarding any of the 3 presentations you just heard.